What up YouTube? It's your boy ATrueHero, and today I got a special video for you. How to beat Diva Hero. And the answer is, play Royal Oppression.
Subscribe or you too will be sent to the Shadow Realm.
Before RBT Moreno Valley began, Keegan posted a prediction video on his channel in which he talked about the top decks and players whom he believed would top the event. I left a comment on that video in which I said, I don't believe Diva Hero will top because I will be unable to attend the event, but I sure do hope that I am wrong. I'm pleased to say in this video that I was indeed wrong because two different Diva Hero players were able to come in top 8 at Moreno Valley. Before us, we can actually see the 6th place deck list, and main deck wise, it is similar, identical rather, to my deck at Nationals with only 2 minor changes. And that is one, he switched out Mind Crush for Dimensional Prison. Now I always advocate about how D-Prison is a great card, so I definitely understand the switch. And it also gives the deck more defensive capabilities. And 2, instead of playing Spirit Reaper, he chose to go with Tragodia. Now, Tragodia is definitely a great card, but I uploaded in my recent video, Diva Hero Q&A, about which card I think is better for the deck, Spirit Reaper or Tragodia. In short, the answer is Spirit Reaper. But if you want to find out more of the details why, please check that video out. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about his side and extra deck, but I will say that here in the extra deck portion, it's a mistake. He did not use Gaia, but instead used the Gemini Fusion, which I think was a very good meta call, because these days the Gemini deck is rising in popularity, and if you don't know how to play against it or you're unprepared for it, you can easily be caught off guard and lose games or even matches to it. Here we can see the 2nd place Diva Hero deck list by Oscar Ruano. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Oscar, he is a very proficient Diva Hero player who at this point has won 3 different PS5s with Diva Hero. However, his Diva Hero deck list and my Diva Hero deck list are quite different. Let's talk about his monster lineup. He plays cards such as main deck Snowman Eater, Card Trooper, and even Armageddon Knight. Whereas me, I do not main deck Snowman Eater, I play Treeborn instead. I do not main deck Armageddon Knight, I play Grepher instead. And I don't play Card Trooper because I don't want to mill my very strong spell and trap cards. When it comes to the spells, he chooses not to play Double Gold Sark. And when it comes to the traps, it's a bit more defensive in that he plays 1 Discard Trap, Phoenix Wing Wind Blast, and double D-Prison. Nevertheless, despite the differences between our decks, we can see that he did get some inspiration from my list at Nationals, as if you compare his previous Diva Hero deck list to the one that I came in 2nd place at Nationals with, he added Spirit Reaper and Mind Crush. So I just want to take the time once again to give both players, Adam and Oscar, their flowers for topping with Diva Hero at such a stacked event. I hope that more players in the future can top with Diva Hero. And with that out the way, let's get on to the siding portion of Diva Hero. Okay, let's talk about general side decking tips. Generally, when side decking, you don't want to side more than 5 cards. If your deck is heavily losing to a matchup, you might want to consider switching decks. Now, another thing to keep in mind is to not side out your engine. These are all tips that I've said before in my previous How to Beat videos, and nothing's changed. You need to learn side decking as a skill. Just try to side deck the critical cards that are most necessary for the matchup. Now against Diva Hero, the top half are cards you can consider siding out, and the bottom half of the cards you see before you are cards you can consider siding in. So let's talk about each and every one of them. Now I'm not saying Card Trooper is necessarily good or bad against Diva Hero, but rather what Card Trooper represents. And in this case, Card Trooper represents low attack monsters that are not critical to your deck's engine. Games 2 and 3, Diva Hero has the option to side into deck devastation virus. So if your deck has a lot of monsters with 1500 or less attack that are not essential, you need to be siding those out. Now, against a plant deck, for example, Lone Fires, those are critical. You can't side those out because the card is such a game-winning card. But Card Trooper, is it really game-winning? Is it really a card that you need? Think about it. Next up, we have Mystic Tomato. Now, recruiters in general are quite good, but the reason why they lack against Diva Hero is because of how easy it is for Diva Hero to drop a Caius. Special Summon Prodigy, sack Caius. Games 2 and 3, Special Summon Cyber Dragon, sack Caius. So oftentimes, your recruiter will not even get the chance to resolve its effect. Next up, we have Gold Sarcophagus. Now this card is quite good, but the problem is it's too slow. It can give the Diva Hero player just the amount of time that they need in order to OTK you. So by the time you receive your card 2 turns later, it could be too late. Next up, Mind Control. Now, you may begin to wonder, ATrueHero, why is Mind Control on the list of cards that I should take out? Well, easy. Diva Hero does not have cards that would benefit you as a player. There are no flip effect monsters, such as Hamster and Raikou. Your best target with Mind Control would be Snowman Eater. Aside from that, a Diva Hero player is not going to set a tuner because when they summon a tuner, it's getting used that turn. So it's not beneficial. And to add on to that, the boss monsters of Absolute Zero, of Diva Hero, cannot be taken. You can technically take them, but what are you going to do with a Stardust? What are you going to do with an Absolute Zero? Just give it back? It's useless. So rather than keeping in Mind Control, just keep in Brain Control, because at least you can take the monster and tribute it and do all the broken things that Brain Control can do. But Mind Control is not the way to go. Next up, Upstart. Now, of course, Upstart might seem like a harmless card because you're giving your opponent 1,000 and in turn you draw a card. But this small advantage in life points that the Diva Hero player has can be used to go against you because it gives Diva Hero more turns to set up and draw their combo pieces and OTK you. Next up, we have Bottomless. Now, Bottomless is quite a good card in general, but against Diva Hero, it finds itself underperforming. Reason being is because most of the high monsters get valued when they're summoned, such as the Triple Caius or even the Stratos. And most of the low monsters that cannot be bottomless, when they make high monsters, they're monsters that resist bottomless. For example, the most common play would be banish Mali for Mali, summon Diva or Plague, make Stardust. And from that point on, your bottomless doesn't do anything. So although Bottomless is a great card, it's not the best side choice against Diva Hero. Next up, we have D-Prison. Now, D-Prison differs from Bottomless in that it is actually quite good. Then you may ask yourself, ATrueHero, why are you telling me to side it out if you just said the card is good? Well, the answer is simple. Because if your deck plays multiple copies of it, then that's one potential card to side out. And also, D-Prison does not prevent you from getting OTK'd. Because usually before the big OTK happens, the Diva Hero player will make Brionic. And cards like Mirror Force and D-Prison, they just bounce back to the hand, and then you take 8,000 and the game's over. But playing Devil's Advocate, it can be good because D-Prison stops every synchro and every fusion, with the exception of Thought Ruler, that Diva Hero can make. And if your opponent summons a 0 off a future fusion and you D-Prison it, well, now they lose one zone in their spell and trap for the rest of the duel, or at least until they find a way to clear their own future fusion. So yes, D-Prison is a great card. If you're playing multiple copies, it can be worth it to side out 1 or 2. However, the card is good. Next up, we have Solemn Judgment. Now, this card should be self-explanatory of why you should side it out, because it reduces your life points to such a low value, and Diva Hero is already an OTK deck. So if you bring your life points down to 4,000, well, you better prevent your opponent from getting a Brionic because you're definitely going to eat 4,000 if that card hits the field. Next up, Starlight Road. Now I can explain in great detail about why Starlight Road is a bad card, and perhaps I'll even do a video on it. Now the card itself is not bad, but it's just not the most effective card against Absolute Zero. And the reason is because of the way the ruling works. Generally, when Absolute Zero leaves the field, it gets sent to either the banish zone or the graveyard. And in that case, if you attempt to activate Starlight Road, yes, you will negate Zero's effect, but you will not be able to summon Stardust because the Zero was not destroyed by Starlight Road, but rather the card or effect that sent it to the graveyard or banish zone. And let's say you say, well, ATrueHero, what about if I just run over Zero and then activate Starlight Road? Then it wasn't sent to the graveyard by the card effect. And where that is true, Absolute Zero's effect activates in the damage step. You cannot activate Starlight Road in the damage step. So now you can kind of piece together why this card is not effective against Diva Hero, Absolute Zero. And last but not least, Trap Dust Shoot. This card is actually quite good against Diva Hero, but it's only good against the build that plays Gold Sarcophagus. If you're playing against a more defensive build and you're going second, I definitely would consider siding this card out because more than likely the Diva Hero player will not have 4 or more cards in their hand. But if you're going first or if you're playing against the Gold Sarc build, this card is an absolute must and should remain in the main deck. So that's it for 10 potential cards that you could possibly side out. Let's talk about 10 potential cards that you can side in. So first up we have DD Crow. This card is self-explanatory. Crow can be quite good, but it all depends on when you use it. Because if the Diva Hero player has multiple heroes and waters in the grave, Crow becomes useless because banishing with Miracle Fusion is not a cost. So you can Crow a target and they can just banish something else because Miracle Fusion doesn't target. However, even though it's not always effective against Diva Hero, they won't always have multiple heroes, they won't always have multiple waters, and DD Crow is also good against other cards such as Treeborn Frog, Plague Spreader Zombie, and Malicious. So DD Crow is an excellent choice to side against Diva Hero. Next up we have Fossil Dyna. Now this card goes without saying. Diva Hero loses heavily to cards that prevent monsters from being special summoned. So this completely locks down, and it can also trade even with Absolute Zero. Just set it, Zero will attack into it, and then Fossil Dyna's effect will trigger, destroying Absolute Zero, along with any other cards on the field that were special summoned. Next up, Kaiko. The reason why Kaiko is so good is because he prevents Miracle Fusion from even being activated, because the Diva Hero player will not be able to banish cards from the graveyard. And if Kaiko is able to get a direct attack off, then you can banish heroes and waters from the grave at will. The only problem with Kaiko is he's kind of like a win more card, because if you're already in a position where you can attack directly, then you don't really need him to help out as a side card. So Kaiko is great in that he prevents the Diva Hero player from activating Miracle Fusion. He can banish heroes, he can banish waters, but also you need to keep in mind that he's only good if you can get a successful attack off. Next up, we have Neo-Spacian Grand Mole. This is probably one of the best side cards you can put up against Diva Hero, because not only is it able to 1-for-1 0, but because of the way the chain link works, actually Absolute Zero won't even be able to destroy your Neo-Spacian Grand Mole. Your Grand Mole will return right back to your hand, and you can do it again on a Synchro or a Fusion or whatever needs to be used on. Next up, we have TKR, Thunder King Ryo. Now this card definitely doesn't see much play with an Edison format, but the card is quite good. It does have its merits. It can be good against Diva Hero because of all the constant searching that happens, such as with cards like Reinforcement of the Army, Stratos' Effect, and also Thunder King will negate synchros from hitting the field. The problem with Thunder King is he cannot stop fusions such as Absolute Zero that are brought out through Miracle Fusion. So you can summon your Thunder King, prevent your opponent from searching, but as soon as they resolve a Miracle Fusion, then things might be difficult. Next up, we have Vanity's Fiend. Vanity's Fiend can win games on its own, especially against Diva Hero. So, the best way to use Vanity's Fiend is to wait until the Diva player has already used their generic blowout cards such as Mirror Force and Torrential, and then when you drop Vanity's Fiend, it'll be very difficult for the Diva Hero player to out Vanity's Fiend. But even if you have an opportunity to safely summon this card, but you're not sure about whether or not they use Mirror Force and Torrential, just go for it, because it can buy you enough time just sitting there, because there are very few outs that at least the offensive version of Diva Hero plays to out it. Next up, Power Filter. Now this is a card that also doesn't see that much play with an Edison format, but it can hurt Diva Hero because it says neither player can special summon monsters with 1000 or less attack, which means it cuts off Diva from being special summoned, it cuts off Malicious from being able to be special summoned, it cuts off Treeborn, right? It cuts off a lot of key cards. But still, there's plays around this. So for example, the Diva Hero player can just go summon Deep Sea Diva, activate the effect, special summon Sign Gilman. There you go. Even though you have Power Filter up, they were still able to do this play, and then they can make a level 5 such as Android or Catastor and move on with their life and not have to worry about Power Filter. So next up we have Smashing Ground. This card is kind of self-explanatory, but it's good against Diva Hero because it can cleanly take out an Absolute Zero. Your opponent has 0 on the field, you just go smashing, and then they cry because it was that easy. Next up, we have Soul Release. So Soul Release is really good because you can choose the cards that you want to banish. And in most cases, you want to banish the waters because it's harder for a Diva Hero player to actually get waters than it is for them to get heroes. But if the time comes where you need to banish other cards, such as Plague Spreader Zombie, it's still very efficient. So this is an excellent card to use against Diva Hero. And now we have the single-handed best card against Diva Hero, which is Super Poly. Now the thing about Super Poly is Diva Hero can actually play around it because Diva Hero doesn't need its heroes and its waters to win. It can beat you with cards like Grepher, Malicious, Plague, Return, Caius, Dark Arm. The main problem with Super Poly isn't Super Poly itself, but it's having space in your extra deck. Do you have space in your side deck for Super Poly? And do you have space in your extra deck for an Absolute Zero? So next up, we have Compulse. This card is really good because it's the Synchro and Fusion stopper in the same way that Grand Mole stops. So this card is much easier than Grand Mole because you don't have to commit your normal summon. You can just set it, and then when your opponent has a card on the field that's problematic, such as a Synchro, etc., just Compulse it. Then we have one of the new cards that's seeing a lot of play these days, Imperial Iron Wall. Now, Imperial Iron Wall is a very scary card against Diva Hero for obvious reasons. No Allure, no Dark Arm, no D-Prison in the builds that use it, no Miracle Fusion. So there's so many cards that this card cuts off. So it's definitely an excellent choice. And usually decks that are playing Imperial Iron Wall can also build a Stardust behind it. So excellent card. Then we have Macro. Macro is a card that shuts down a lot of top decks, but this shuts down Diva Hero for obvious reasons. You can't activate Miracle Fusion if you don't have anything to banish in the grave, right? So Macro is definitely what I would like to call a degen card, but it's really good against Diva Hero. Turn one. Turn one. Just be careful, because if you draw a card like Macro too late, or even Iron Wall, you could just be out of the game. And then we have Pulling the Rug. There are so many different targets that Pulling the Rug hits against Diva Hero. You have the triple Deep Sea Diva, you have the Stratos, you have the triple Caius. That right there, just off the top of my head, is 7 different monsters, right? In some builds you have Armageddonite, right? So the point is, Pulling the Rug is an excellent card against Diva Hero. And last but not least, the best of them all, Royal Oppression. So it's hard to say between Super Poly and Royal Oppression which card hurts Diva Hero more, but if I had to choose right now, it would be hands down Royal Oppression. Royal Oppression makes it so that you just cannot even play the game. At least if you get Super Poly, like you were playing the game or you were attempting to play the game. But with Royal Oppression, there is just no hope. You better hope you have the Decree or MST in the side. So anyway, that about wraps up the siding portion of this video. So moving on, I'm going to showcase a match between me and a fellow duelist, and it'll be a mirror match where I carefully analyze the details to help you win against your next Diva Hero set. Okay, so for this mirror match, I'm up against Frank 11, and thankfully for me, I do win the RPS. I open up Stratos and add Prodigy to my hand. Now, there are 2 things to bear in mind based off of what the Diva Hero player adds to their hand. If the Diva Hero player adds Prodigy, this more than likely means they have a card to combo with Prodigy, such as Deep Sea Diva or Caius. It can also mean they already have the Malicious in hand. If the Diva Hero player adds Malicious, you need to be afraid, because this means the Diva Hero player already has a way to reliably discard Malicious to the graveyard, and potentially on the following turn inflict a substantial amount of damage to your life points. Now, there are 3 main ways in which Malicious is commonly discarded, and as 1, through the use of a discard trap, such as Phoenix Wing Blast or Geki Break. 2, through the use of Dark Grepher, and in some builds Armageddonite. Of course, Armageddonite does not discard Malicious, but rather sends it from the deck to the graveyard. And 3, through use of Brionic's effect. And this is why it is imperative to not leave a level 4 monster on the Diva Hero player's side of the field. If you do, and the Diva Hero player has a tuner in their hand, on their following turn, they can make Brionic, discard Malicious, and it becomes that much easier to OTK you. Think about it like this. When you're playing against zombies, if you don't do anything to stop the Brionic, what's going to happen to you? You're going to lose. The same case is with Diva Hero as well. Now, in order to protect my Stratos, I set Mirror Force and I pass. My opponent opens up Stratos as well, adds Malicious, activates Gold Sark for future fusion, sets 2 back rows, and passes. Now, his play demonstrates the lack of knowledge that he has in the matchup. Of course, not to insult anyone, but rather to showcase the importance of getting rid of a level 4 monster on the Diva Hero player's side of the field. Take a look at my hand. I have Game, and it's all because he left Stratos on my field. I can go summon Diva into Diva, Synchro into Brionic, pitch 3 Darks, make Colossal Fighter by banishing Malicious for Malicious, drop Dark Arm. Colossal will be at 29, and that is lethal. Once again, all because he left a level 4 monster on my field. So guys, please make sure to get rid of that monster. Now, although I do have Game, it is not a play that I go for, because my opponent also added a Malicious as well, which tells me he has a way to reliably discard Malicious. So he could have a discard trap. And even if he doesn't, if I overextend, I lose to Torrential Tribute. So instead I go for the conservative play, and I attempt to crash out Stratos into Stratos. But going back to my example, let's say I have Heavy Storm. Now my opponent loses, and it's all because he did not get rid of the level 4 monster. So I attack, my opponent flips up D Prison, which is quite good for him. So main phase 2, I special summon Prodigy and I sack for Malicious. The reason why I choose Malicious over Caius is because 1, this reliably puts Malicious in the grave. 2, let's say my opponent has a discard trap. The worst case scenario would be Wing Blast. Well, he'll Wing Blast my Malicious, but I can set Torrential and prevent myself from getting OTK'd. Since my opponent set 2 back rows turn 1, he more than likely does not have Heavy Storm. And let's say the back row is not Wing Blast, but rather Regeki Break. Then he'll break my newly set, which would be Torrential, and I have Mirror Force to protect me. Now, Mirror Force is not the best card against Diva Hero, because if my opponent has a tuner with Malicious in his hand, then he can just make Brionic, bounce the Mirror Force, and it's like it wasn't even there. Unfortunately, in Yu-Gi-Oh!, you simply cannot play around everything, but you want to try to play around the most options that you can. Also, because my opponent added Malicious, this tells me he more than likely does not have a Caius in his hand, because if he had Caius, he would have added Prodigy instead. So, if I set Torrential and my opponent summons Caius on his turn, then when he attempts to banish my Malicious, I can just clear the board. So, I set Torrential. During the end phase, I draw from Prodigy's effect, but unfortunately my opponent does have the MST and hits my Torrential. My opponent draws Return and draws into a Return from a different dimension. This works out perfectly for him because Dark Grepher and Malicious are quite a good combination, but only when used correctly. The general play of summoning Grepher, pitching a Malicious or Plague out of your hand to send a Malicious or Plague from your deck to the graveyard is generally not good, because it puts you at such a disadvantage just to make a level 8 or level 6 synchro. You lose a card out of your hand for Dark Grepher's effect, and you lose an additional card out of your hand that you must stack to pay the cost for Plague Spreader Zombie. So it's not good. However, there are some cases when you need to do this play and you don't have a choice because you need to out whatever it is your opponent has on the board. Now, this play does become good when you have Return from a different dimension. You're still in a disadvantaged state, but the value that you'll get when you flip Return is so great, since you'll have both Plague and Malicious banished, that oftentimes it will be enough to win you the game. So it's good to keep in mind how to effectively use Dark Grepher and Malicious. Additionally, the way that I personally use these two cards is by using Dark Grepher's ability to special summon himself by discarding Malicious. When you do this, 1, you keep your normal summon, and if you normal summon by following up with a tuner, you can make a level 8 and a level 6 synchro in the same turn and inflict massive amounts of damage to your opponent's life points. Not to mention, when you discard Mali with Dark Grepher's effect, you maintain your turn player priority, which means you can banish Malicious for another Malicious before your opponent can activate a card like DD Crow. So my opponent here, he goes pitch Mali, pitch Plague, and he makes a Stardust and attacks with everything over my Malicious. Now, I disagree with attacking with Stardust. The reason being is because since he minused himself so much, now your win con becomes Return from a different dimension. And if Stardust were to get D-Prison, Return becomes very frail. It can lose to Heavy Storm, it can lose to MST, it can even lose to a monster effect. So you lose your win con just off an attack. And yes, of course, Stardust can come back with Return, but it's better to ensure your Return is there when you need it to be. However, he already knows, because he's a fan of mine from Ecuador, that my builds don't run D-Prison. But as a Yu-Gi-Oh player, you should not be trying to play against a true hero, but you should be trying to play the best Yu-Gi-Oh that you can play in any given situation. But it works out for him, and I take a lot of damage. Of course I have Mirror Force, and I can activate Mirror Force, but there's no point because 1, the damage I take isn't lethal, and 2, my opponent has Stardust. So for turn, I draw into D-Draw. And I know what you're thinking. A true hero. Is D-Draw that new meta that Diva Hero needs to play? And the answer is no. Guys, the card is terrible. But after each and every event, I make slight changes to my deck to see what can make the deck better. And in testing, I found D-Draw to severely underperform. Now, of course, it could be due to the lack of targets. I was only playing double Malicious as targets, and I could add cards such as Doom Lord or Diamond Dude, but I didn't want to because it doesn't make sense to add bricks to my deck just to make one card good. With all the bricks that I add, I could build a house, and I'm not trying to build a house. I'm trying to win in Yu-Gi-Oh! So I draw D-Draw, but it doesn't really matter because my hand is quite good. So I go Summon Diva, Special Summon Gilman out the deck, banish Mali for Mali, Synchro into Stardust, activate Future Fusion, send the third Dark, Special Summon Dark Arm, and with Prio, I target the back row. He tributes his Stardust to negate. I tribute my Stardust to negate his Stardust. I activate Dark Arm's effect once again, targeting a Stratos, and I attack over his Grepher with Dark Arm and swing direct for 17. And this puts Frank 11 in a terrible situation because during the end phase, his Stardust will not come back because it was negated by my Stardust. And now he has to deal with a Dark Arm and a Stardust, Spine Gilman, Future Fusion, and all my monsters are back behind a Mirror Force. Plus, he stacked his previous card. So, for turn, he adds the card that he stacked, which is Miracle Fusion, and since 2 turns passed off Sark, he also adds Future Fusion. So he activates Future Fusion, sends both a Warder and a Hero, activates Miracle Fusion. And at this point, I bet Frank 11 was thinking, I'm feeling myself, because it seemed like he was going to be in an advantage state. However, when he summoned Absolute Zero and attempted to run over Stardust since his Zero's at 3k, I flipped up Mirror Force and he just conceded. So that was game 1. Now, game 2, we can talk about what cards are good to side against Diva Hero. As you can see in my opening hand, I open up D-Draw again, showcasing that this card is terrible, but I also drew into Soul Release. Now, Soul Release is quite good against Diva Hero because there's only so many heroes and waters that the deck plays, and if you hit a lot of them, then it'll be very difficult for the Diva Hero player to resolve Miracle Fusion. Not to mention, there are other good cards too that you can activate on that aren't just heroes or waters, right? For example, you can also activate it on Plague Spreader Zombie. And you can also activate it on, now this is both a hero and a water, but cards like Malicious and Treeborn. These are all critical cards to the deck that if they get soul released, it really hurts. So I brick, as you can see, and my opponent opened up quite well. Actually, in his opening hand, the only bad card that he has is Spine Gilman. But Spine Gilman isn't even bad in this scenario because since I bricked, it can apply pressure to me. However, one thing that he forgets to do is to draw his 6th card. But he quickly remembers after summoning Stratos, because I reminded him that he needs to draw for turn. He draws into Mirror Force and then summons Stratos and adds Malicious to his hand. So with that, he sets 2 back rows and he passes. As you can see, I draw into Mind Control, which is not helpful here at all. So what I decide to do is just set Torrential and Mirror Force and pass after taking some time to think. Now my opponent draws in a Gold Sark and he Gold Sark for Miracle Fusion, which isn't a bad choice in this scenario because as you can see, he has both heroes and waters in abundance in his hand. So he attacks direct with 18. There's nothing I can do to respond to that. And I draw into Stratos. And I'm thinking, yes, this D-Draw is about to go off. Like, this is exactly what I need. Stratos into D-Draw. So I summon Stratos, I add Malicious, and my opponent flips up Mind Crush. This has to be top 10 worst Mind Crushes. Because Diva Hero players want the Malicious in the grave. And if Malicious is in the grave and I have a tuner in my hand, then on the following turn, he can just die. But in this one small scenario, the Mind Crush worked out in his favor because I have D-Draw, and I really needed that D-Draw to draw two additional cards. So even though I didn't express anything and I didn't show it, I mean, it's Dueling Book, so it's not like you can see my facial reaction anyway, I just continued to play. Now, as I said before, it's not wise to leave a level 4 monster on the field against Diva Hero, but in this scenario, I have Torrential. So I'm not worried about him potentially summoning something and getting out of hand. And I have Solemn as well, so I'm just genuinely not worried. And I want to keep my level 4 monster on the field, because if I draw into a tuner, it's over, especially since I have Mind Control and Plague in the Grave. So I choose to not attack. Now my opponent draws into Future Fusion. He plays Future Fusion, sends a hero in the water, summons Diva, gets Diva, and I allow everything to go through. And I was hoping my opponent would make Brionic. Because if my opponent makes Brionic, I'll let him return as many cards as he wants. And then on my turn, I'll go Mind Control, his Brionic, I'll get rid of any problematic card, and then I can go Miracle Fusion, banish his Brionic, and banish one of my heroes, right? Depending on the scenario, depending on what I draw, I can banish the Malicious or the Stratos. But he made Goyu Guardian. And Goyu Guardian in this case is a big problem, because he can attack my Stratos and then search out a hero. And I don't want him to plus like that when I brick so hard. So I flip up Torrential, the Torrential goes through, and he's forced to pass. So I draw into Miracle Fusion, still my hand is dead, and at this point, I want to get rid of as many heroes and waters as possible, right? So I go Soul Release and get rid of everything, and afterwards, I pass. But the most unlucky scenario happens. My opponent immediately, after I Soul Release him, draws into Return from a Different Dimension. Actually, funny story, at Nationals, when I was playing, this happened to me in real life. I Soul Released, I was playing against the mirror match, I Soul Released the Diva Hero player, and I got rid of a lot of his key cards. And then within a turn, he draws into Return from a Different Dimension and sets it, and he wound up flipping it on me. I still somehow managed to come out on top, but it's just crazy the irony. Anyway, my opponent, he adds Miracle Fusion to his hand because 2 turns has passed, and he summons Fine Gilman. And just as I said before, Gilman in this scenario is quite good because it applies pressure to me because I bricked. So I take 17 and he sets a back row, I draw for turn. I draw into Greffer, which is not too helpful in this scenario because I don't have any way to utilize his effect. Greffer's primary purpose in Diva Hero is to send Malicious to the grave, and as we can see, Malicious is already in the grave. So what I do here instead is I Mind Control and I activate Miracle Fusion to summon 0. Now I look at his clock. His Future Fusion is already at 1 turn, so I cannot afford to attack direct at this point because if he has a card like Mirror Force or D Prison, I cannot deal with his 0. My out to his 0 is my own 0. So I just pass. Once I find out the summon is successful, I choose to just pass. Now my opponent draws in a Dark Arm, but thankfully at this point, he doesn't have any darks in his grave thanks to the Soul Release. And he summons 0, he attacks, and now the board is clear. Main phase 2, he thinks about what to do and pass. I draw, and once again, my hand is still dead. Of course, I can go summon Treeborn, activate Miracle Fusion, and attack, but I'm down so much in card advantage that I cannot afford for anything to happen to 0. Plus, Treeborn can help keep me alive in this game. So what I do is I summon Greffer, I attack, and surprisingly, my opponent flips up Mirror Force. So I'm very happy with that trade. That was a very good trade. My opponent draws for turn, thinks about what to do, and flips up Return. I didn't even look at his Banish Zone because I already knew there was way too much broken cards there. So I Solemn the Return, I drop down to 2250, and I think, well, there's so many ways that I can just die. But to my surprise, my opponent just passes. And I draw into Future Fusion, which is exactly what I needed. So I go Future Fusion. I think for a moment about whether or not it's smart to activate Miracle Fusion, and also if Miracle Fusion resolved to attack for 25. But I ultimately decide to activate Miracle Fusion because I have 2 waters and 2 heroes, so DD Crow won't stop me. So I activate it, summon 0, I attack because I realize that I'm not going to win by playing passive. And main phase 2, I set Treeborn Frog. Reason being, it plays around Brain Control. If my opponent Brain Controls my 0, then he can just attack and it's lethal because I'm at 2250. So I set Treeborn, my opponent draws into Solemn and concedes. So I hope from this match, everyone watching was able to learn a lot of the insides of how to play against Diva Hero. Once again, the key takeaways are: 1. Not leaving a level 4 monster on the field. 2. Being attentive to what cards the Diva player has searched or added to their hand with cards like Stratos or Gold Sark. And 3. Remember, against Diva Hero, you should be aggressive. This is not something I mentioned before, but I'm saying it now. Diva Hero is an OTK deck. You want to kill them, the Diva Hero player, before the Diva Hero player can kill you. In most games, if the Diva Hero player resolves a Gold Sark, you're going to lose within 2 to 3 turns. So you need to be as aggressive as possible. There's 2 different builds of the Diva Hero deck, as I explained before, the offensive one and the defensive one. Especially against the offensive version, be aggressive to dwindle their life points down to 0. And against the defensive version, you can also be aggressive, but also just play a little bit more smart. So anyway, guys, that's it for today. I hope it was helpful. Please, these videos take a lot of time, and if you enjoy the content and it really helps you to become a better Yu-Gi-Oh player, just holler at your boy. Like, comment, subscribe. Until next time, ATrueHero out. Peace.